She was humiliated, heartbroken, and moments away from being the town's biggest scandal. Until he walked through the door. What happened next would shock everyone and change her life forever. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The morning sun painted the Texas sky in shades of amber, and rose as Elizabeth Hartford stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, her hands trembling as she adjusted the delicate lace veil that cascaded down her shoulders. The ivory wedding dress, imported all the way from Boston at considerable expense, fit her perfectly, accentuating her slender waist and the gentle curve of her shoulders. Her golden hair had been arranged in an elaborate updo, adorned with small white flowers that her younger sister had picked from their mother's garden just that morning. Elizabeth's blue eyes, usually so bright and full of life, now reflected a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made her heart race beneath the embroidered bodice of her gown. "You look absolutely beautiful, Lizzie," her mother, Margaret Hartford, whispered as she entered the room, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. She carried a small bouquet of wild flowers mixed with roses, their fragrance filling the air with sweetness. "William is a very fortunate man to be marrying such a wonderful woman." Elizabeth forced a smile, though something deep within her chest tightened at the mention of her intended husband's name. William Prescott came from one of the wealthiest families in Austin, and their union had been carefully arranged by their parents over the course of the past year. He was handsome enough, with his dark hair and green eyes, always impeccably dressed in the finest suits money could buy. He had been polite during their courtship, bringing her flowers and taking her on chaperoned walks through the town square. Yet despite all his apparent virtues, Elizabeth had never felt that spark of genuine connection, that deep understanding that she had read about in the novels she secretly borrowed from the town library. "Mother," Elizabeth began hesitantly, turning away from her reflection, "do you think that love can grow after marriage, even if it isn't there before?" Margaret's expression softened as she approached her daughter, gently taking her hands in her own weathered ones. "My dear child, marriage is about partnership, about building a life together. Love takes many forms, and what you feel today may deepen into something profound over the years. William is a good man from a respectable family. He will provide for you, protect you, and give you the life you deserve." Elizabeth nodded slowly, wanting desperately to believe her mother's words, even as a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something essential was missing. She had always been the dutiful daughter, never causing her parents any trouble, always following the proper rules of society. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the culmination of everything a young woman of her station could hope for. So why did she feel as though she were walking toward a cage rather than toward freedom? The small church at the edge of town was filled with guests by the time Elizabeth arrived in her father's carriage. The wooden pews were packed with Austin's most prominent citizens, all dressed in their Sunday finest, their faces turned expectantly toward the entrance. The scent of burning candles mixed with the perfume worn by the ladies created a heady atmosphere that made Elizabeth's head spin slightly as she stepped through the doorway on her father's arm. James Hartford, a stern but loving man who had built a successful cattle ranch through years of hard work, patted his daughter's hand reassuringly as they began their slow walk down the aisle. The Reverend stood at the altar, his Bible open before him, a gentle smile on his weathered face. But as Elizabeth's eyes moved to where William should have been standing, waiting for her with his groomsmen beside him, she felt her heart plummet into her stomach. The space where her groom should have been was completely empty. His groomsmen shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, their faces flushed with embarrassment and something that looked almost like pity. Elizabeth's steps faltered, and she heard the collective gasp that rippled through the congregation like a wave. Whispers began immediately, growing louder with each passing second. Her father's grip on her arm tightened, and she could feel the tension radiating from his body as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. "Where is William?" James demanded, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent church. His face had turned a deep shade of red, and Elizabeth could see a vein pulsing at his temple, a sure sign of his rising fury. One of the groomsmen, a young man named Robert, whom Elizabeth recognized as William's closest friend, stepped forward nervously, clearing his throat. "Mr. Hartford, William asked me to convey his deepest apologies. He's not coming. He left town this morning on the early stage to Dallas. He said he couldn't go through with the wedding." The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow, and she felt the room begin to tilt around her. The whispers exploded into a cacophony of shocked exclamations and scandalized murmurs. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could sense the mixture of pity and gleeful gossip that would follow this moment for years to come. In that instant, standing in her beautiful wedding dress before the entire town, Elizabeth Hartford became an object of public humiliation, a cautionary tale that mothers would tell their daughters about the fickleness of men and the cruelty of broken promises. Her mother rushed forward from her seat in the front pew, her face pale with shock and distress. "Elizabeth, darling, come. Let's get you out of here." But Elizabeth stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process the enormity of what had just happened. All the months of planning, all the preparations, all the dreams she had tried to construct around a future with William had just crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds. She felt humiliated, betrayed, and utterly exposed before the judgmental eyes of Austin's society. It was at that precise moment that the church doors opened again, and a different kind of silence fell over the congregation. This silence was not born of shock or scandal, but of fear and uncertainty. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the bright morning sunlight streaming through the doorway, and as he stepped inside, Elizabeth could see him clearly. He was a Comanche warrior, his presence commanding and powerful in a way that made the very air seem to vibrate with intensity. His long black hair was adorned with a single eagle feather, and his bronze skin gleamed in the candlelight. He wore traditional buckskin clothing decorated with intricate beadwork, and his dark eyes swept across the assembled crowd with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something that spoke of both strength and surprising gentleness. Several women in the congregation let out small shrieks of alarm, and Elizabeth heard her father curse under his breath. The Comanche had been at war with the settlers for years, raiding ranches and settlements along the frontier. To see one walk boldly into a church in the middle of Austin was unprecedented, dangerous, and absolutely terrifying to most of those present. "Everyone remain calm," James said, though his own voice shook slightly. His hand moved instinctively toward where his pistol would normally hang at his hip, but he had left it at home, as no one brought weapons into church. The warrior's eyes moved across the faces before him until they settled on Elizabeth, still standing in the aisle in her wedding dress, her bouquet clutched tightly in her trembling hands. For a long moment their gazes locked, and Elizabeth felt something pass between them, some unspoken recognition that she couldn't begin to understand or explain. His expression softened almost imperceptibly, and he took several steps forward, causing gasps and the scraping of boots as several men prepared to defend their families. "I am called Running Wolf," the warrior said in surprisingly clear English, his deep voice carrying easily through the tense silence. "I come in peace. I was told by the trader at the fort that today there would be a wedding in this place, and I came to witness the white man's ceremony. I did not know that the groom would prove himself a coward unworthy of such a woman." Elizabeth blinked in surprise at his words, and she saw several jaws drop around the room. The Reverend, who had remained silent throughout this entire ordeal, found his voice at last. "Young man, I don't know what business you think you have here, but this is a private ceremony and I must ask you to leave immediately." Running Wolf's eyes never left Elizabeth's face as he spoke again. "Among my people, when a warrior makes a promise, he keeps it or he is not considered a man. This William has shamed himself and dishonored this woman before her entire tribe. Such behavior would not be tolerated among the Comanche." The tension in the church was so thick that Elizabeth could barely breathe. Her father's hand remained on her arm, but she could feel him shaking with a combination of rage at William's abandonment and fear of the Comanche warrior who stood before them all. Running Wolf remained perfectly still, his posture radiating a calm confidence that seemed almost out of place given the circumstances. Elizabeth found herself unable to look away from him, struck by the intelligence and unexpected compassion she saw in his dark eyes. "This is absurd," her father finally sputtered, finding his voice. "Elizabeth, we're leaving. This day has been enough of a disaster without entertaining the presence of a savage in the house of God." The word stung, and Elizabeth saw Running Wolf's jaw tighten slightly, though his expression remained otherwise unchanged. Something in that subtle reaction sparked an unexpected anger within her own chest. Here was a man, different though he might be, who had shown her more respect in the last few minutes than William had shown her by abandoning her at the altar. The humiliation that had paralyzed her moments ago suddenly transformed into something else entirely, something fierce and defiant that she had never felt before in her carefully controlled life. "Wait," Elizabeth heard herself say, her voice stronger than she expected. She pulled her arm free from her father's grip and took a step toward Running Wolf, aware that every person in the church was now staring at her with renewed shock. "You said that among your people, a warrior who makes a promise keeps it. Is that truly the way of the Comanche?" Running Wolf nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "A man's word is sacred. Without honor, a warrior is nothing. I have watched your people for many years, traded with some, fought with others. I have learned your language and tried to understand your ways. But I do not understand how a man can look at a woman like you and choose to run away rather than stand beside her." "Elizabeth, what are you doing?" her mother gasped, hurrying forward to try to take her daughter's other arm. "You're in shock, dear. Let's get you home so you can rest and recover from this terrible ordeal." But Elizabeth shook her head, a wild idea beginning to form in her mind. It was insane, completely improper, and would scandalize the entire town even more than William's abandonment already had. Yet, as she stood there in her wedding dress, feeling the weight of hundreds of judgmental stares, she realized that her reputation was already ruined. Nothing she could do now would make things worse in the eyes of Austin society. She would forever be the woman who was left standing at the altar, the object of pity and gossip, unless she took control of her own story right now, in this very moment. "You came to witness a wedding," Elizabeth said to Running Wolf, her voice growing steadier with each word. "The Reverend is here. The church is prepared. The guests are assembled. I am dressed as a bride, and I refuse to let William Prescott's cowardice define this day or my future." Running Wolf's eyes widened slightly, and she saw something that might have been admiration flicker across his features. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if you meant what you said about honor and keeping promises, then stand with me now. Marry me in this ceremony that was meant to happen today. Show this entire town what real courage looks like." Elizabeth's words came out in a rush, and she heard her mother actually cry out in horror behind her. The church erupted into chaos. People were shouting, some calling for the sheriff, others declaring that Elizabeth had clearly lost her mind from the shock of being abandoned. Her father looked as though he might collapse from apoplexy, his face turning from red to purple as he tried to form coherent words. The Reverend held up his hands, calling for order, but his voice was lost in the tumult. Through it all, Running Wolf remained focused entirely on Elizabeth, studying her face as though trying to see into her very soul. "You would bind yourself to a Comanche warrior, knowing that it would mean leaving everything you know behind. Your people would never accept such a union. You would be cast out from your family, from your society. You would have to live as one of us, follow our ways, adapt to a life completely different from anything you have ever known. My life here is over anyway," Elizabeth said, surprised by the truth of her own words. "After today, I'll be nothing but the subject of gossip and pity. Every unmarried man in Austin will see me as damaged goods, and every married woman will look at me with a mixture of sympathy and superiority. My father will eventually arrange another marriage to salvage what's left of the family's reputation, and I'll be expected to accept whatever offer comes, grateful that anyone would have me at all. Is that really a better fate than choosing my own path, even if it leads somewhere unknown?" Running Wolf was silent for a long moment, and Elizabeth could see him considering her words carefully. Finally he spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I did not come here today expecting this, but I have never met a white woman with such fire, such courage. Among my people, women are valued for their strength as much as their beauty. You would be honored as my wife, protected, respected. But the path would be difficult. There would be many who would not accept you on both sides. Are you truly prepared for that?" "I don't know," Elizabeth admitted, her honesty surprising even herself. But I know that I'm tired of living a life where every decision is made for me, where I'm expected to be nothing more than a decorative object passed from my father's house to my husband's house. You're offering me a choice, even if it's a terrifying one. That's more than anyone else has ever given me." The warrior's expression softened further, and Elizabeth saw genuine warmth enter his eyes. "Then I will stand with you. If you are brave enough to take this step, I am honored to take it with you. But you must understand, there is no going back from this. Once we speak the vows, you will be my wife in the eyes of both our peoples, and I will defend that bond with my life." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or humiliation now. They were tears of something that felt almost like relief, like freedom. She turned to face the Reverend, who had finally managed to restore some semblance of order to the chaos. "Reverend Parker, will you perform the ceremony?" The elderly minister looked completely overwhelmed, his eyes darting between Elizabeth, Running Wolf, and the sea of shocked faces filling his church. "Miss Hartford, I cannot in good conscience perform a marriage ceremony under these circumstances. You're clearly not thinking rationally. This man is a Comanche warrior. The implications of what you're suggesting are enormous. The implications of William's abandonment are equally enormous," Elizabeth countered. "I'm standing here before God and this entire congregation, dressed as a bride, ready to make sacred vows. The only question is whether you'll help me reclaim some dignity from this disaster, or whether you'll force me to walk out of here as nothing but a rejected woman, a source of entertainment for gossip mongers for years to come." Her father finally found his voice again, though it shook with barely controlled fury. "Elizabeth Marie Hartford, I forbid this absolutely. You will come with me right now, and we will go home and figure out how to deal with this situation like reasonable people. I will not allow you to throw your life away on some wild impulse born from understandable emotional distress." "With all due respect, Father," Elizabeth said, turning to face him with a calm she didn't entirely feel, "I am 22 years old. Under the law, I don't need your permission to marry. I've spent my entire life being the dutiful daughter, following every rule, meeting every expectation. And where has that gotten me? Standing here humiliated, while the man you chose for me proves himself to be without honor or courage. Running Wolf may be Comanche. He may be different from us in many ways, but in the last 10 minutes, he has shown me more respect than William showed me in months of courtship." Running Wolf stepped forward to stand beside Elizabeth, and she felt the solid warmth of his presence like an anchor in the storm of chaos surrounding them. He spoke clearly, addressing the entire congregation. "I know that many of you fear my people, and I understand why. There has been much bloodshed, much pain on both sides of our conflict. I do not pretend that one marriage can heal all those wounds, but I stand before you now and give my word, on my honor as a warrior, that I will cherish this woman, protect her, and stand beside her for all the days of my life. Can any man here say that the one who abandoned her today would have done the same?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable and powerful. Elizabeth saw several faces in the crowd shift from outrage to uncertainty, and even her father seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Her mother was weeping openly now, though whether from grief, shame, or some other emotion entirely, Elizabeth couldn't tell. Reverend Parker closed his eyes, clearly struggling with an impossible decision. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Elizabeth. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I need to hear you say it clearly, with full knowledge of what you're choosing." "I am certain," Elizabeth said firmly. "I choose Running Wolf. I choose the unknown over a life of being defined by someone else's betrayal. I choose courage over comfort." The Reverend sighed deeply, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Let it be recorded that I performed this ceremony under protest, but out of respect for Miss Hartford's right to make her own choices, even ones I cannot fully support." He opened his Bible with trembling hands and began to read the familiar words of the marriage ceremony. Elizabeth felt Running Wolf take her hand, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as they intertwined with hers. She looked up at him, this stranger who was about to become her husband, and saw him looking back at her with an expression of wonder mixed with determination. The Reverend's words washed over them, and when it came time for them to speak their vows, Running Wolf's voice was steady and sure. I, Running Wolf of the Comanche, take you, Elizabeth Hartford, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, to protect you, to stand beside you in times of plenty and times of hardship. I will teach you the ways of my people, and I will learn from your strength and courage. This I swear before your God and before the spirits of my ancestors. Elizabeth's voice shook slightly as she spoke her own vows, but she didn't falter. I, Elizabeth Hartford, take you, Running Wolf, to be my husband. I promise to honor you, to stand beside you, to face whatever challenges come with courage and determination. I choose this path freely, and I will walk it with you wherever it leads. When Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife, a stunned silence fell over the church. Running Wolf leaned down and gently kissed Elizabeth's forehead, a gesture of respect rather than passion, and she felt something settle in her chest, a sense that despite the insanity of what had just happened, she had made the right choice. The journey from Austin to the Comanche encampment took 3 days on horseback, and every mile carried Elizabeth further from the life she had known and deeper into an uncertain future. Running Wolf had provided her with more practical clothing before they left, buckskin dress and moccasins that one of the trading post women had reluctantly sold them. Elizabeth had left her wedding dress behind, folded carefully in her childhood bedroom, a ghost of the life she had abandoned. Her parents had refused to speak to her after the ceremony, though her mother had pressed a small leather pouch of coins into her hands when her father wasn't looking, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a broken goodbye. Running Wolf proved to be a patient and considerate traveling companion. He showed Elizabeth how to sit properly on the horse he had brought for her, how to read the land for water sources, and how to move quietly through the wilderness. At night, they made camp under the vast Texas sky, and he would tell her about his people, their customs, their beliefs, and what she could expect when they reached the village. He spoke of his mother, White Dove, who was a respected medicine woman, and his younger sister, Morning Star, who he said would help Elizabeth learn the ways of Comanche women. You will find it difficult at first, Running Wolf said on the second night, as they sat beside their small fire. Our ways are very different from what you know. The work is hard, and the life is not easy, but our women are strong, valued members of our community. You will not be a decoration or a possession. You will be a partner, expected to contribute and to learn and to grow. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around her knees, staring into the flames. I'm terrified, she admitted. Every mile we travel, I wonder if I've made a terrible mistake. But then I remember standing in that church, feeling like my entire life was over before it had really begun. And I know that whatever awaits me with you has to be better than that. Running Wolf was quiet for a moment before he spoke again, his voice softer than she had yet heard it. I am terrified, too. I have never taken a wife before, and certainly never a white woman. There will be those in my village who will question my choice, who will say that you cannot be trusted, that you will betray us to the soldiers or bring danger to our people. I will have to prove them wrong, and you will have to prove yourself worthy of their trust. How do I do that? Elizabeth asked, meeting his eyes across the fire. By being yourself. By showing the same courage you showed when you chose to marry me, instead of accepting the shame that William's abandonment would have brought you. By working hard, learning our ways, and proving that you are committed to being one of us. He paused, then added, and by giving me time to know you and you to know me. We have entered into this marriage without love, born from unusual circumstances, but I believe that respect and understanding can grow into something deeper, if we both choose to nurture it. Elizabeth felt her heart warm at his words. In the 3 days they had traveled together, she had seen Running Wolf's kindness, his intelligence, and his quiet strength. He had never once treated her as less than an equal, never demanded anything of her beyond her willingness to keep moving forward. She found herself drawn to him in ways she had never felt with William, whose polished manners had always felt like a performance, rather than genuine feeling. When they finally arrived at the Comanche encampment late on the 3rd day, Elizabeth's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The village was a collection of teepees arranged in careful patterns along a river valley, with horses grazing nearby and smoke rising from cook fires. Children played in the open spaces between the dwellings, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked on various tasks, preparing hides, cooking, tending to the never-ending work of maintaining a community. Warriors sat in groups, talking and maintaining their weapons. As Running Wolf and Elizabeth rode into the village, activity gradually ceased as people stopped to stare at the white woman he had brought among them. Elizabeth could feel the weight of their gazes, could sense the mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and outright hostility from some quarters. She sat up straighter on her horse, refusing to show the fear that churned in her stomach. Running Wolf had warned her that showing weakness would only make things harder. An older woman emerged from one of the larger teepees, her face weathered but still beautiful, her long gray-streaked hair braided with beads and feathers. This was White Dove, Running Wolf's mother. She approached them with measured steps, her dark eyes assessing Elizabeth with an intensity that made the younger woman want to look away. But she forced herself to maintain eye contact, remembering Running Wolf's advice about showing strength. Running Wolf dismounted and helped Elizabeth down from her horse, then spoke to his mother in rapid Comanche. Elizabeth couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the respectful tone in his voice, could see the way White Dove's expression shifted from stern assessment to something softer as her son explained the circumstances of their marriage. Finally, White Dove turned to Elizabeth and spoke in halting English. "My son tells me you chose him over your own people, that you married him to escape shame but also because you saw honor in him. This is a strange thing, but not without precedent. Long ago, before the conflicts grew so bitter, there were sometimes marriages between our peoples. You will have much to learn, and not everyone here will welcome you. But if Running Wolf has chosen you, then I will help you learn our ways. Whether you can truly become one of us remains to be seen." "Thank you," Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I know I have much to prove. I'm willing to work hard and to learn. I ask only for patience and the chance to show that I can be worthy of the trust Running Wolf has placed in me." White Dove nodded slowly, then gestured for Elizabeth to follow her. "Come, I will show you the teepee that you will share with my son. Tonight there will be a gathering and you will be introduced to the elders. They will decide if you can stay." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. White Dove and Morning Star, a bright-eyed young woman who regarded Elizabeth with open curiosity, showed her around the teepee that would be her new home. It was surprisingly spacious inside, with carefully arranged sleeping furs, storage parfleches decorated with intricate beadwork, and a small area for cooking. Morning Star chattered away in a mixture of Comanche and broken English, explaining various items and customs, her enthusiasm helping to ease some of Elizabeth's anxiety. As the sun began to set, the village gathered around a large central fire. Elizabeth sat beside Running Wolf, acutely aware of the many eyes upon her. The elders, a group of older men and women who carried the wisdom and authority of the tribe, sat in positions of honor. One of them, a man with a face like carved stone, and eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, spoke at length in Comanche. Running Wolf translated quietly for Elizabeth. "Chief Gray Eagle questions why I have brought a white woman among us when our peoples are at war. He says that many of our people have been killed by white soldiers and settlers, that there is deep pain and anger toward all whites. He asks how we can trust that you are not a spy, sent to learn our ways and report our location to the army." Elizabeth's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept her voice calm when she responded, speaking slowly so that Running Wolf could translate. "I understand your distrust. I cannot undo the wrongs that have been done on both sides of this conflict, but I can tell you that I had no plan to come here, no scheme or deception. I married Running Wolf because he showed me more honor in a moment of crisis than the white man who was supposed to be my husband showed me in months of courtship. I chose to come here knowing that I would be leaving everything familiar behind. I have no love for the army, no loyalty to those who would wage war against you. I ask only for the chance to prove myself through my actions, not just my words." Gray Eagle listened to the translation, his expression unchanging. Then he asked another question, which Running Wolf again translated. "He wants to know if you are prepared to live as a Comanche woman, to work alongside our women, to learn our language and our ways completely. He says that if you fail, if you prove unable or unwilling to adapt, you will be sent back to your people, and Running Wolf will be shamed for his poor choice. I am prepared, Elizabeth said firmly, looking directly at Grey Eagle. I will not claim that it will be easy, or that I won't make mistakes, but I promise to work as hard as any woman here, to learn everything I can, and to prove that Running Wolf's faith in me was not misplaced. The discussion continued for some time, with various elders expressing their opinions. Some were clearly opposed to Elizabeth's presence, their faces hard with old anger and fresh suspicion. Others seemed more willing to give her a chance, perhaps moved by Running Wolf's passionate defense of his choice, or by Elizabeth's own straightforward responses to their questions. Finally, Grey Eagle raised his hand for silence and pronounced his judgment. You may stay, Running Wolf translated, relief evident in his voice. But you will be watched closely. You will be expected to prove yourself worthy of the trust we are extending. If you betray us in any way, the consequences will be severe. But if you prove yourself to be truly committed to our people, you will be welcomed as one of us. Elizabeth felt tears of relief prick her eyes, but she blinked them back, nodding her acceptance of these terms. The gathering began to disperse, and she felt Running Wolf's hand on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. You did well, he said quietly. I know that was difficult. It was terrifying, Elizabeth admitted with a shaky laugh. But we made it through. The following weeks were the most challenging of Elizabeth's life. She woke before dawn each day to help with the endless work of the camp. White Dove and Morning Star taught her how to prepare hides, how to gather and prepare food, how to maintain the teepee and care for clothing and equipment. Her hands, which had never done more than delicate embroidery and light household tasks, became raw and blistered from the hard labor. Her back ached from bending over tasks, and she fell into bed exhausted every night. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Her hands grew calloused and stronger. The language that had seemed impossibly complex began to make sense, and she could understand and speak simple phrases. The women who had watched her with suspicion began to offer occasional words of advice or nods of approval when she completed a task well. Children who had initially hidden from her started to approach with cautious curiosity, and she learned their names and began to understand their games. Through it all, Running Wolf was a steady presence. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit together and talk. He taught her more of the Comanche language, told her stories of his people's history, and listened with genuine interest as she shared her own experiences and thoughts. She learned that he had lost his father in a raid 3 years earlier, that he had been training since childhood to be a warrior, and that he had a deep love for his people and their way of life. Elizabeth found herself falling in love with him gradually, not in the sudden, passionate way she had read about in novels, but in a deeper, more fundamental way. She loved the way he treated her as an equal, the way he respected her struggles and celebrated her victories. She loved his quiet strength, his wisdom, and the gentle humor that would occasionally surface when they were alone together. And she could see in his eyes that he was developing similar feelings for her, that what had begun as an impulsive marriage was transforming into something real and lasting. One evening, about 2 months after her arrival in the village, Elizabeth was helping to prepare the evening meal when she overheard 2 of the older women talking. Her Comanche had improved enough that she could understand most of their conversation, and she heard one of them say, "The white woman works hard. She does not complain and she learns quickly. Perhaps Running Wolf chose more wisely than we thought." The other woman nodded. "She has courage. That day she stood before Grey Eagle and answered his questions without fear. I began to think that maybe she could become one of us. And look at her now, working alongside us as though she was born to it." Elizabeth felt warmth spread through her chest at these words. She was being accepted, slowly but surely. That night, as she and Running Wolf sat together outside their teepee, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, she told him what she had overheard. Running Wolf smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I am not surprised. You have shown them exactly what I saw in you that day in the church, that strength and courage that made me willing to stand beside you. You are becoming one of us, Elizabeth. Not because you have forgotten who you were, but because you have chosen to embrace who you can become." He reached out and took her hand, and Elizabeth laced her fingers through his, feeling the rightness of the gesture. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly, "for giving me a choice when I had none, for seeing something in me worth honoring, for being patient as I learned to live in this new world. You gave me a gift as well," Running Wolf replied, his dark eyes serious as they met hers. "You trusted me when you had no reason to. You chose me over safety and comfort, and you have shown me what it means to truly commit to something, to throw yourself completely into a new path without holding back. I have grown to love you, Elizabeth. Not just respect you or care for you, but truly love you. You are my wife in every sense of the word, and I am grateful every day that you were brave enough to stand with me." Elizabeth felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy this time. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think it was possible to find this, to feel this way. But you've given me something I never had in my old life, a true partnership, a real connection. I don't regret my choice, Running Wolf. Not for a single moment." He pulled her close and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Around them, the village settled into its nighttime rhythms, and Elizabeth realized that this place, so foreign and frightening just weeks ago, had become home. She had found belonging not in the world she was born into, but in the one she had chosen, standing at an altar on what should have been the worst day of her life. As the months passed, Elizabeth became fully integrated into the life of the Comanche village. She was no longer the white woman who Running Wolf had brought among them, but simply Running Wolf's wife, a valued member of the community. She had learned to ride in the Comanche way, to speak the language fluently, and to navigate the complex social structures of the tribe. When spring arrived and she discovered she was carrying Running Wolf's child, the village celebrated with them, and even Gray Eagle smiled when he heard the news. Standing by the river one morning, watching the sun rise over the water, and feeling the new life growing within her, Elizabeth thought back to that moment in the church when her entire world had fallen apart. William's abandonment, which had seemed like the end of everything, had actually been the beginning of her real life. She had been left standing at the altar, humiliated and lost, only to find courage she never knew she possessed, and love she never expected to experience. She had married a Comanche warrior in a ceremony born of desperation.